So I decided to redo my commentary over my Battle for Bikini Bottom any percent submission because I feel I can do a much better job the second time around in explaining everything. So let's just get right into it. Important to note in this run, it was not a personal best or world record or anything like that. This is actually just the first run I've ever completed with the current and most optimized route of this game. So I figured it'd be a lot more interesting and relevant than just going over the outdated strats. So let's just get right into it. Coming up, we're going to collect this golden spatula inside of the closet here. We need 75 of these to complete the game, and once you get the 75, you can go into the final boss fight, and defeating that will win the game. Now, to get there, we need to go past all these various levels in Bikini Bottom, many worlds you recognize from the show, with many glitches and tricks and stuff like that. But to first even start doing all this, we need to activate the chief glitch that is probably the most important in the run, here by disabling the hand. Now, if you lay next to the taxi pad out of bounds and let it drag into the taxi, you can press A to activate the prompt that causes the loading zone to appear on the taxi pad. So now if I do this a second time, the hand drags me into the taxi, and the hand stays on the screen going into this next level. And by doing that, the hand, which serves as the game's out of bounds guarding to make sure you can't leave the map, is now disabled. So you'll see in this next area we're coming up to, I'm going to jump out of bounds, and the hand is not going to bring me back in. Yeah, this part of the run is still pretty similar to how it was a couple of years ago, since it's pretty optimized. All you do is you're trying to get to the top of Jellyfish Fields, which is the first area you can even complete in the game because you don't have enough spatulas to go anywhere else. But what I just did there was I collected the spatula from out of bounds and warped to it, because whenever you collect the spatula, regardless of whether you receive the mission, you can warp to that mission in the menu because the game thinks you've already, I guess, received the mission because you've already completed it. So I guess that makes sense, right? And you'll see that logic appear again later when I explain teleport boxes. But for now, just know there are a lot of loopholes in developers' logic for this game, which lets us abuse the game a lot and get through these levels a lot faster than intended. Now over here, we're going to set up hammer skip, which is an AI manipulation, into a frame-perfect double jump onto the sledge. Now, a frame-perfect double jump in this game is performed by jumping on 1/60th of a second. That's 1 out of 60 frames in 1 second between the damage animation and falling animation when SpongeBob gets hit by something. So if you do that perfectly, you can actually get another jump out of midair and get more height or distance or whatever you're trying to accomplish. And again, this part has gotten slightly more optimized since the last time the game was in the marathon, but we still get this suck here. It's quite crazy. The last time this game was featured, it was still a 59. Now we're almost going on to a 54 now. But yeah, we're just going to get this suck, and now we're going to collect this teleport box here and jump into this cutscene over goo. Now, drowning during this cutscene causes us to skip the cutscene, which is a pretty useful trick we're going to see later in the run as well. But here we're going to set up a damage boost in which you can slide off the sledge and get more frames for doing a grounded frame-perfect move. See, usually if you do a grounded move in midair, it requires a frame-perfect activation to do it. However, if you slide against a ledge, and you'll see that later in the run as well, sliding against the ledge gives you more frames to activate this jump, or bash, or bowl, or whatever you're trying to do in midair. So it's a pretty useful tactic that can be used in other places of the run, especially SpongeBob's Dream. A lot of players use these strats in there as well. But now we're going to head over to downtown, and this segment has changed a lot since the last time this game was in the marathon, and I'm sure if you haven't even seen a run of this game this summer, you might not even know what's about to happen. But first, what we just did there is we jumped over the taxi pad to enter it, and this is something we'll be using in various different ways throughout the run, because jumping over a taxi pad allows you to skip the animation of the spatula count disappearing. You know, when it shows you, oh, you need 5 spatulas to get into this area. Well, you can actually just skip that if you jump over the taxi pad and accept the prompt during the cutscene going away. So it's a pretty nifty strat, and it saves a second or two in various areas, so we always use it just to save that little bit of time. That can be very helpful. Speaking of saving a little bit of time, unfortunately this run didn't get this strat, but there is a 1 second time save here if you get lucky and one of these sinks that are being shot at me from the cannon hit one of these stacks of tikis to destroy one early for me. Now, that would cause us to save 1 second, but again, it's not that big of a deal, and especially for how few RNG segments there are in this game, it's really not a big deal at all. But 1 second of RNG is surprisingly a pretty high amount of time you can lose for RNG in this game, considering there hardly is any. So it's at most frustrating, but it's not going to kill any runs. Now here we're setting up this next strat, or segment, called Needleless, and by needleless we mean we're going to skip the Sea Needle, which was a pretty long and dragging segment that used to be an 80%, but now it's skipped by activating, or doing rather, 2 one-frame jumps onto these buildings to skip to the rooftops without Sandy. Now in this particular run I did miss the first one-frame trick, which is not, again, there are backups for these strats, so they are marathon safe. Not a big deal, we can just go this way and use the sponge ball storage where, or not sponge ball storage, but rather jumping out of a sponge ball by getting some momentum off that little, that arrow you saw there by knocking against it. We're just going to work our way up to here with some platforming and stand on this cannon again to attempt a second one-frame jump, and there at that time we actually got it, which is really good because missing that loses a lot of time as well. Again, my estimate is going to reflect how much time I would realistically need to get all these strats, so nothing to worry about there. But what we're doing here is we're entering the rooftops of SpongeBob, and this is not what you're supposed to do. Right? You're supposed to come up here as Sandy, which is the reason why when you talk to Larry there, he has no text for you. He just says the default "what's happening, SpongeBob," because you're not supposed to be here entering the first time as SpongeBob. But this is a lot more optimized than how we used to do it, because in the past you'd have to go all the way to the bus stop you're about to see here to switch to SpongeBob to hit that button on the ground, because Sandy can't hit grounded buttons. You have to go all the way to the bus stop, switch to SpongeBob, go all the way back, and switch back to Sandy again. So it was really, really slow, and it's nice that this can be routed out now to be made a lot faster. And especially here, we're going to go through the rooftops a lot faster this time, just because we don't have to collect the steering wheels anymore. So here we're going to grab onto 2 of these lassos. If you're familiar with the old route of this game, you'll also notice that when we get up to this next part here, there's no platform cycle to make on this anymore. There's no more trying to get on top of that slide to get the next wheel and make the platform cycle by moving quickly. Instead, there's no more cycle, which is good because now we can go even faster without being restricted to how slow the cycle is. So we're just, again, going to walk right past that slide, grab this lasso here. Sandy is used as more of the character for crossing large gaps and gliding across these areas like you're seeing here. But later in the run, Sandy's strats are going to be obsolete to a trick we call cruise boosting, and you'll notice it's pretty fast, and it's going to be used a lot after the industrial park fight, which is the second boss fight in this game. So now we're here heading into the lighthouse, which has again changed a little bit. There used to be a strat in here where we would clip through one of the electric gates to get the wheel that's hidden in the lighthouse. However, we don't need to do that anymore because we don't need to trade in wheels. See, routing out the Sea Needle removes 3 spatulas. It removes the Extreme Bungee spatula from hitting the tikis and getting the spatula from Mr. Krabs. It removes the end of the road spatula, which is given to you for collecting all 11 wheels and trading to Mrs. Puff, because there's 1 wheel inside the Sea Needle, and you can't physically get every wheel if you don't buy the Sea Needle. So by routing out the Sea Needle, you can't get the wheels, and therefore we can't get the spatula. And there's 1 spatula in late game called Come Back with the Cruise Bubble, in which you just come back with the Cruise Bubble, which is a power-up you get in this game, and you just get a spatula in 30 seconds. But altogether, the 3 spatulas are very slow and expensive, and they've been routed out for 3 faster ones, which you'll see later in the run. Now we're going to head over to Goo Lagoon now, where we're going to first stop by Squid's house. Again, this is another really funny routing change. It was found that in the past, people knew this was faster, but it's kind of one of those things that over the many years of running this game, since 2014, I believe, people forgot this strat was actually faster by going to Squidward's house between downtown and Goo Lagoon rather than doing it before downtown, because it used to be used before people started cruise boosting in Patrick's Dilemma, which we skipped earlier with the cutscene skip and the damage boost. When that was routed out for cruise boosting strats, which were later found to be slow in that area, we had to get 5 spatulas. So from like 2014, 2015, 2016, people would just do they would do Squidward's house early to get the 5 spatulas to enter downtown. But since Patrick's Dilemma was routed back into the run, we later realized this year that we can start doing Squid's house early again, or rather later again, sorry, to save an additional 1.5 seconds. So just an example of how sometimes it's really good to keep your game well documented. Otherwise, you might miss some very small things that can save a lot of time if added up. Now, this takes us to our next skip called Sponge Glide. This is probably the moment in the last GQ, people realized, wow, this speed game is really, really cool. So we're going to set this up here, and well, obviously I know the outcome of this run. We're going to slam into this tower and get stuck. Now, doing this causes the sponge glide to activate, and this is just the skip that we use to sequence break and skip all the way to the end of Goo Lagoon, and in which we're going to backtrack and do the whole level in the reversed order. But first, we need to damage boost over to the stack of crates here, again, which is accessible because you had the hand disabled at this point. But the reason why we got to hit that robot is because we're later going to get rewarded a spatula for destroying it. So you'll see that later. Before we leave the lagoon, you're going to see I'm going to get a spatula from Larry for destroying that thing. Alright, so we successfully entered the loading zone for the Goo Lagoon Pier. Now that's usually where you exit the pier as Patrick to then finish connecting the towers, which is just a Goo Lagoon puzzle that you got to go through the whole level to complete. By destroying that robot, we hit the objective for the puzzle, so we don't have to do that now. Thankfully, because it's very slow and tedious. But now we're just backtracking in the reversed order, and we're going to skip a challenge called Slip and Slide Under the Goo now, which is the first Patrick ice skating challenge in the game. But because slide momentum in this game is absolutely busted, we can just jump under the pier and grab the spatula, which we usually have to slide under the pier by freezing the goo to get. Now, from here, we're actually going to death warp by abusing invincibility frames you have after collecting a spatula. You'll see SpongeBob popped up from the goo at first, then he drowned. So that's a little bit of a quick movement there, but it's not very difficult to get down. This, however, is the opposite. It's very difficult. So you have to climb the flags here, which are somehow solid, and get a very precise ledge grab on this board to skip paying a clam or a toll gate to get this spatula here. Now, you actually can't just jump straight into the goo. A lot of people ask this question, why don't you just jump down and get the spatula? Well, the spatula doesn't spawn until you get on the bungee cord, so you have to climb the flags to get it. But it does make for some pretty cool movement and a pretty interesting skip at that. But that's the first instance of clam skipping in this game, where we skip a toll gate. Or as a matter of fact, it isn't the first, because people forget that the first spatula we get in Jellyfish Fields is actually a clam skip. But it skips a lot more than the clam, so it's easy to forget. But we skip clams in this game because they're very expensive, and there's no reason to pay extra shiny objects for something you can just skip. And shiny objects, if you don't know already, are the game's main form of currency. We use them to purchase toll gates if we absolutely have to, clams if they're unskippable. We use them to buy spatulas from Mr. Krabs later in the run as well. And you'll also notice we're collecting socks as well. These are the secondary collectible in this game under golden spatulas. You collect 10 socks and trade them to Patrick for a golden spatula. So we're going to collect 30 socks throughout this run, 10 of which are going to be collected before the 10 of which are going to be collected before Poseidon, which is the first boss fight in this game, the first major boss fight, and then we're going to trade in the next 20 before the final boss fight. And you'll see here we're still backtracking through Goo Lagoon. Now, you might notice that I was jumping in boxes earlier to skip parts of levels, and that is because, like in Jellyfish Fields, how we activated that box, if you activate 2 boxes in the same level, you can jump between them. This is a mechanic, again, used to speed up the fast traveling through levels, to reward players for completing levels. They don't have to play the whole thing again. They can just jump between the boxes to skip to the parts they've already been to. But an oversight for some levels in this game is that if you have the second box open, the game automatically assumes that you've opened the first one. So by entering through the back of the level in a sequence break, you can jump from the end of the level to the beginning of the level without having to go through the whole thing. So it makes for some levels, especially the Kelp Forest, very, very fast, because you don't have to do pretty much anything. You just jump from box to box, use the spatula warping technique to collect the spatula you haven't received a mission for, then just warp to that spatula without even having talked to the character that gives you the spatula or tells you how to get it. You know, it's pretty interesting to see how some of these segments work out, because a lot of these levels are shaped in loops where you start at one end, you go through the level, and you appear back at the end that you started. So because of this, and because a lot of gaps in this game can be crossed with various speed techniques, a lot of this game is just skipping to the end of a level and backtracking to the beginning and then receiving the rewards for doing that. Now here, to get back on track, we're doing the Poseidon fight now. And this is probably one of the best areas for reading donations, in my opinion, if there are any. Of course, this boss fight is pretty repetitive. you just rinse and repeat the manipulations to try and get her to walk into the side of the map to initiate the clothesline move as quickly as possible. So that's why I would say, like, at this part in the run, I would offer for donations to be read. But that doesn't mean that nothing interesting is going on here, because these manipulations are a little bit precise, and they are, you know, even to some high-level players, they don't get them too consistently. But yeah, all we're doing is manipulating this boss to land close to the edge of the map, so that way we can lure it in and initiate this next attack. The goal is to get this thing to attack as quickly as possible and attack it as quickly as possible. Yeah, this boss fight is actually unskippable, because if you, well, in this category, I mean to say, I'm submitting another category called NG+, where you don't have to fight either of the bosses that you can't skip, being Robo Patrick and Robo Sandy, because you already start with the power-ups that you would collect by beating these bosses in this game, in this category. So by defeating Robo Sandy, you get the Bubble Bowl power-up, and by defeating Robo Patrick, you get the Cruise Bubble power-up. And so we need those to activate a glitch later called Cruise Boosting, which you'll see is very useful and makes the end of the game go by very quickly. In fact, we go from 41 spatulas to 77 spatulas in the span of like 20 minutes. It's very fast-paced. But to set all this up, we're just unlocking all these levels, collecting the fastest spatulas without Cruise Boosting, so we can return later to Cruise Boost and collect and clean everything up. And you'll see there are a lot of secondary cleanup segments past the industrial park, where we return to all these levels and collect everything we missed. But the backtracking in this game is very fast-paced and fun because of the menuing system available, where you can just pause the game, warp to any mission you want in the game, and just go from there. And the teleport boxes also make it a lot more fun too. So where a lot of games have, you know, dragging and slow backtracking, this game's backtracking is actually pretty fun. So now we're going to finish the Poseidon fight with 19 spatulas, and we're going to have the Bubble Bowl power up now, in which we're going to head into the Tree Dome. So in the Tree Dome, the first thing we're going to do is bowl this duplicator, the Duplicatatron, that spawns more robots, because now we have the Bubble Bowl power up now. So what I'm looking for here is what you just saw. The Duplicatatron spawned its robot after I already approached it, so it's going to appear on the picnic desk now. And we're just going to bowl a ramp off this tree to hit it without having to approach it. And after this, we're going to set up the next trick called Fast Buck, which is coined after being a fast way to get on top of the chum bucket, so it's just Fast Buck for short. In the past time this was in GDQ, we actually did this with a trick called Sponge Ball storage, where you can bring a sponge ball by storing it in your jumping all the way to the top of the police station and roll across to the chum bucket. But now we do a setup into a frame perfect damage boost. Again, has a backup strat as well. But this time we got it, and we damage boosted onto the chum bucket, which skips the barrier for getting into the third hub area of the game. So instead of having to defeat Robo Patrick to get to this area, we can now just skip to it. So where we should have 41 spatulas, we have 21 entering this area. And if you notice there that door has 75 spatulas locked onto it, that is the door for the final boss fight, which we can't access yet because we need 75 spatulas to get into there. So even though you can get to the area where the final boss fight is, and you can even clip behind the doors too, you can't even get into the boss fight unless you have 75 spatulas, which is a really good thing as well, because if you could just go there and clip behind the door, it would make the speedrun really, really boring. So it's nice that we're forced to go through all of these levels and experience this whole game and all its great tricks without being able to clip into the doors 20 minutes in. And so we are now going to head to SpongeBob's Dream. And you might be wondering why Mr. Krabs is invisible there when he gives us the spatula. It's because we're not really supposed to be here right now. Krabs is actually on the other side of that barrier, waiting for us by the outside of Industrial Park, because we haven't defeated the Robo Patrick boss yet. So there, Krabs appears to be invisible. And now we're headed to SpongeBob's Dream with some quick block platforming. And this part we're going to bowl onto the slide to increase our acceleration. And land on this block to skip another toll gate, or a clam rather. Skip having to pay some shiny objects to get up here. Now we're going to enter Squid's Dream to collect this warp for the mission, because as I said earlier, you can warp to any mission in the game that you collect. We're going to save that for later when we have cruise boosting to go faster there. Now we're going to do another frame perfect damage boost out of a bowl here to get this spatula earlier than intended. Normally you'd have to do this trick called following the bouncing ball, where you have to bowl this wheel, drop a ball onto the platform, and follow it to jump onto the ball and then to the spatula. But here I'm going to grab the ledge to set up this next trick for the proper timing for this guy to be in the right spot. I'm going to, again, as done in Patrick's Dilemma and Jellyfish Fields, set this up so I slide across the ledge and get extra frames for this damage boost. So it makes it slightly more consistent. It is only 6 to 7 seconds slower than doing the 1 frame strat. And at this point in the run, there are already so many 1 frames and run killers of that sort that at this point it's not worth going for, in my opinion, for the time that I have. But in the future, it'll definitely be added for more optimized attempts of this game. The game's already optimized enough, and if you're confused as to why I'm minus 40 right now, I'm not minus 40 on world record pace. It's just I'm minus 40 on a pace at this point was like a half-finished run that I did of this current route. So again, it's not minus 40 off of a 55:36. That's, especially at this point in the game, is not going to happen, trust me. So now we're headed into the Murmelair, where we're going to do another one of those frame perfect damage boosts off of this area on this damaging tile, in which we got. And if you do that correctly, you can go through that electric gate before it starts on you. Saves a couple of seconds. Again, there are some riskier ones. That's not a very risky 1 frame strat. There are plenty of them though that are even very late into the run that can kill your run if you miss it. But for marathons, like I said, there are backup strats for these things if they're missed, and a lot of them don't even have to be attempted anyway for a marathon run. But we just skipped the Murmelair lobby by grabbing that ledge earlier, and it's a pretty small level. As a matter of fact, it's a skip that I found when I was a kid playing this game, and I guess a lot of people also knew about it, but it's funny how it's still useful in the speedrun, even though it's a very basic and predictable thing to do. So now we're going to go into the melon throwing segment. All we're going to do here is complete these puzzles to quickly get these melons to the buttons. Now, normally you're supposed to follow those blank tiles to not get hit, but we're going to actually, just because the melons don't get destroyed by these red tiles, you can just throw them onto the red tile, jump over the red tiles, go to the end, and because you've already gone to the end of the puzzle, the tiles disappear and you can walk back, grab the melon, and throw it again. Now there, pretty simple. We just walked across the platforms and through it. No major speed tech there. This is more of a safety strat by walking on the side here so the cannonballs can't hit you. Because if you do fall off from getting hit here, you will have to restart the level, which loses a ton of time. However, there is a half-second safety strat where if you talk to Mermaid Man before doing this challenge, you can warp back to Mermaid Man after that, after being hit by those cannonballs if that happens. And in that case, you only lose a couple of seconds or so. But in a personal best attempt, it's definitely best to save that half second because you never know when you're going to need it. Now, this puzzle here is kind of funny because a lot of people don't realize how easy it is to beat. All you have to do is hit every tower once in any order to get them all facing inward. In this particular situation, we do the towers in a certain order, which is considered to be the optimal path in this current day. But you can also just go in a straight line from left to right, and that works just fine as well, which is what I assume most players do. So after collecting the spatula, we're going to hit this button, which is the first button of 4 that we need to disable the security system, which is not actually useful for going to a new area, but it's good for getting a spatula that's rewarded for it. And the reason why it's not useful is because by this slide momentum boost that we did here, we just skipped to the final fight in this level, which we are going to return to later with cruise boosting to do faster than we can without it. So now we're going to head over to the security tunnel, which is again a sequence break because we just skipped the entire main chamber of the Murmelair. So we're going to head over to the security tunnel and now skip the security tunnel. We're actually going to complete the security tunnel without even entering the tunnel. So we're just going to jump over here onto this ledge. Again, there are invisible ledges you can't see because these objects are horribly defined. Then we can boost into the electric, get a little bit of damage off of that, and now go for this button after attacking the ARF, which is the cowboy robot you just saw. And in fact, you might have noticed that I got a frame perfect damage boost, a frame perfect bowling shot off of the Tiki. So if you bowl on the 1/60th of a second that you are going faster by falling off the Tiki, like if you bowl on that one frame that you're falling off from standing on it to walking off the ledge of it, you can get a little bit of an accelerated boost, because bowling on the frame that you're moving fast takes that speed that you were previously moving at and stacks it onto your current bowling speed. And in other speed runs of this game, in other categories, it's actually useful to use the strat called bubble ball boosting out of a hand, in which you can warp across entire maps with this strat. But in any percent, currently we just use it for very small things like that. And as I said, by hitting all those buttons, you would unlock the security system area, which is the prawn fight villain containment system. But because we've already unlocked it, we just need the spatula for getting the buttons, and we're out of there. Now this is actually an added part of the speed run called Rock Bottom Early. In this we divide some of the Rock Bottom spatulas into the early part of the game before Industrial Park, which was not done the last time this game was in GDQ, or even before the summer started for that matter, if I remember correctly. But what we're going to do here is a trick called Bathroom Boost, and by doing this we're going to stand on top of the restrooms of Rock Bottom, get this guy to damage us and hit us over this ledge. Again, if you're sliding off a ledge, you get extra frames, but that second jump you saw there off the hot sauce was an extended damage boost into a frame perfect double jump, which saves a couple of seconds to get that again. Excuse me, it saves a couple of seconds if you get that, but again, there are a lot of damage boosts in this game that aren't risky and only lose a couple of seconds if you miss them, and there are ones that are risky, like the fast bucky trick, the fast buck trick you saw, the fast buck trick, and the sea needle trick where we skip the sea needle. Again, there's an example of sliding off a ledge to get extra frames or boosting. It's a trick called Sleepy Skip. We just damage boosted to that iron complex to get the spatula early. Now, in fact, Sleepy Skip, the timeline of this game, you wouldn't know if you haven't seen this run since the last time it was in GDQ, but Sleepy Skip is actually also the optimal strat if you're doing this run with cruise boosting and Rock Bottom the whole time. The reason why Sleepy Skip is used in both cruise boost and non-cruise boost Rock Bottom segments is because you can't get the height to get over to that area without a cruise boost. So it makes sense just to damage boost over to it, because it gives you more height. Which is also why it makes sense to do it earlier as well. This is also another small RNG segment here. You can save or lose a second based on whether those kids that are sliding on the ice walk in front of you when you go on the ice to slide to the sock. If you notice in my personal best cam, I didn't get the trick, so it's just a second time loss or time save. Now here, being blown up by these tikis is actually some pretty precise movement. We're going to try and get as maximized combos as possible. And as you saw earlier, I got the Super Ultra Mega Monster combo, which is a bonus of, I believe, somewhere between 100 and 120 shiny objects. So it's important to get these combos on this slope, while again doing these out of bounds clips you're seeing here with the billboard and the rocks. But yeah, you get a lot of shiny objects for that, and you're going to see here we're going to damage ourselves again to increase the combo count. Yeah, Rock Bottom, Sand Mountain we're using here to replenish the shiny objects that we spent for getting into this area. And also there are a lot of free and fast socks on this slope as well. So now we're going to hit these buttons that are behind these robots. Unlike Jellyfish Fields, we can't hit these buttons unless the robots are destroyed. So here you're going to see me hit a bowling shot onto that Tiki to blow it up, hit the other robot and destroy it before I get over there. I attempted to do it earlier before. You're supposed to hit that bowling shot before hitting the first button, but as you may have noticed, there was a robot that jumped in front of my shot, which is completely luck-based. There was nothing I could have done about that. So I did the backup strat, which is bowling it a second time, and I got it, which saves a little bit of time over waiting for the robot to blow up itself. So now we're going to switch to Sandy, and you'll see here that because I missed the one frame jump in downtown, I have to get this sock that's under this bridge over here to make up for the sock that I missed, because there is a sock on top of that building, and by having to walk around, I could not get the sock, and therefore I have to get an extra one here to make up for it. So getting that sock costs an extra 5 seconds, and missing the 1-frame strat in downtown costs 15 seconds. So we usually just say, oh, missing that 1 frame costs 20 seconds. And the cannon after that costs 15 seconds every time you miss that. Not to mention you have limited health for these things too. If you get hit too many times, you can't attempt it anymore. So it's pretty rough. Over here, I guess I decided to wait for that Chuck to throw the missile because I didn't want to risk throwing this pace. Again, this is very similar to the cow bungee strat in the beginning of Jellyfish Fields where you jump out of bounds to get the spatula. And we're going to actually use that warp to the spatula later after Industrial Park because we need cruise boost and do the next strat there. But to do that next strat, we need to first get the power up, the cruise bubble, by defeating this boss. Now this first part of the boss is honestly pretty mundane. You're just kind of waiting for them to hit you and then land so you can hit him back. But yeah, it's not very long. It's only 1.5 minutes long, and it's also a decent time to get donation readings done as well. Yeah, so all I'm doing here is I'm just kind of waiting for him to land. The next segment after this is going to be pretty interesting though, so I might as well explain that. In this next segment, each hit rises the floor for the goo. So you'll see that area where he's standing now will get filled up with goo after hitting him the first time in the second phase. And it's important to note that you can't use a projectile move in the second phase because you play as Sandy. So you'll see that there's a lot of swinging on these Texas swingers to drop boxes because that's the function of them. We use the Texas swingers to stall above the map so he can't hit us, while also using them to drop boxes. So you're going to see the next phase is a lot of dropping boxes and predicting where he's going to land, trying to hit him. Fun fact, I actually died here last GDQ. A very rare thing. In fact, it's never happened. It's only happened to me once in the 2.5 years I've been running this game. Is the hitbox on that, or excuse me, the collision box on that ice cream cone is solid. So I was hovering above it. He ran under me with the ice cream cone. I got trapped, and then I just drowned. So that was like a 1.5 minute loss, and it was really sad. Hopefully that doesn't happen again this year, but again, with how rare it is, I highly doubt it happen. Or maybe it's a reason for it to happen because, you know, just my luck, right? But as I mentioned earlier, we spawned this box here to drop the goo, and I'm going to stand in front of him when he shoots that vomit out of his mouth to end his vomit cycle early. Now, what he'd usually do is chase you, is just stand in that one spot and rotate around the arena trying to chase you down with his vomit. And by hitting him early, it's actually faster because the whole vomit cycle takes a really long time to finish. So we're going to do the same thing again. Here I go for this box in the middle there. I attempted to spawn another one to get close to him, but I figured it'd be faster to do that, I guess. Again, he rises the goo up a second level this time. I'm just going to bait him to shoot his goo over there. And I'm going to stall above the map again so he can't hit me. So you see he's spinning. He's going to land after 10 seconds of spinning. You can just hit him. This 10-second rule is also very important to know for the third phase as well, where I'll be hitting him and then having to predict where he's going to land, because he can no longer land. Again, here's a vomit cycle interruption. He can no longer land anywhere in the center of the stage. You can only land on the sides because it makes sense. You can only hit him with a bubble bowl up to this point because we don't have access to the homing missile attack, or the cruise bubble rather. So I'm going to stand in this corner to manipulate him to bounce off the corners. Now, as he's bouncing off the corners, I'm going to try to predict based on where he'll be in 10 seconds to stand after he stops spinning. So it's looking like he's going to land in this corner up there. And yeah, so I even rewatching this VOD, I didn't predict that very well. I believe that he probably hit that corner after 9 seconds of spinning, so he just barely missed it. And so because he missed the train to get on that 10, you know, like it's kind of like waiting for a bus. Like you miss the bus, you got to hit the next stop, you know. You got to catch the next bus. You got to catch the next bus after the bus leaves. So the bus left for that 10-second window, and he bounced on the other side because he had to catch the next bus. I guess you can put it that way. But see, as you can see, I'm getting a pretty poor Industrial Park segment so far because I predicted wrongly both times. I want to emphasize that this is not an RNG segment. This is not random. It's just very precise and hard to read where he's going to go. But you get it down with a lot of experience. And unless you die, it's not really a big deal in a marathon run for him to get bad spins. But yeah, he's going to land on this side this time. That's a pretty easy prediction to call. And after this, we've defeated Robopatrick, and we have the Cruise Bubble attack now. The Cruise Bubble is the most important move in this speed run, in my opinion, because we use it to clip through stuff and boost speed. And you'll see here, in this particular run, I failed miserably at this for some reason. I don't know why it took me so long to get this, but it's pretty much just a double activation of using the Cruise Bubble and Bubble Bolt on the same frame while sliding between to stack the speed of the sliding motion into faster movement that is captured, and it's held until you either leave the level, die, get hit by something, or just remove it by bowling as I did there. Now you'll see this is going to be used in many parts of this run from now on because it's very fast movement and it stacks onto your base standing speed. So if you stand still, you'll still move without touching the controller. It just pushes you forward. It's very strange, but running and pushing forward with this causes a sprinting kind of motion. So it's very useful. And you'll see here what I just did there was an L bowl, and that's the same input as doing a Cruise Bubble, just the Bubble Bowl and Cruise Bubble on the same frame. But when it's done on a flat surface, it produces a cruise boost. When it's done on a surface that isn't flat, it doesn't produce a cruise boost, but rather it produces an L bowl. And that's used to not only clip through that wall you saw there, but also it's used to boost speed on that one frame we clipped through. So that's used to skip this entire slide by warping down to the end of it. It's usually a slide that takes around 2 minutes to complete, and we just did it in around 40 seconds, so pretty huge. This is a very recent skip as well. This was found just only, I think, a couple of weeks ago, and it's already being implemented, and it's, as you can see, this run turned out pretty decently for the first thing completed of it. So now that we got that spatula, we're going to head over to the Murmelair, where we go back to the villain containment system to fight Prawn, except we're not going to actually fight him. We're going to cruise boost and use an L clip, which is abusing the game's frames where it ignores collision during the Cruise Bubble to clip out of the wall there and touch this invisible trigger that's above the spawn of this fight to end the fight. Now, there are several boss fights in this game that have invisible triggers that by touching them ends the fight and triggers the final cutscene for the fight, but the bosses that don't have them are King Jellyfish, Robopatrick, and Robosandy. So we can't skip those fights. We can only skip these like Prawn, Flying Dutchman, and Robo SpongeBob. Spoilers. So now we're going to clip into the rolling ball cage. This is typically like a mousetrap obstacle type area of the run or casual play where you have to roll the ball along the rails and get it into the socket to open that case you saw there. But by using an L clip, as I mentioned before with Prawn, we can clip through by sandwiching ourselves between that rolling ball and Mr. Krabs to force ourselves into the case. So it's kind of like a proxy almost, but it's more specifically an L clip because we're using the non-collision, I suppose, the frame in which you don't collide to go through the case. So here we're sequence breaking rock bottom to skip this time challenge that's usually at the end after you complete the level, the entire world of rock bottom. Now, as I mentioned before, these levels, a lot of them are running in loops where you start at the beginning, you go through everything you do, and then you appear back at the beginning of the level, and rock bottom is no exception. This is actually the finished, this is the final spatula you're supposed to get in rock bottom, but it's stored in the first level because it runs you in a loop. And anything that's running a loop in this game is very abusable because you can just use damage boosting, cruise boosting, and using the Cruise Bubble attack there, as you saw there, to skip the whole thing and backtrack. Now, rock bottom isn't a true front to end backtrack. We go in a very strange order in here. We're actually going to go to the museum first and then go to the end of the level after doing the museum. So you'll see we'll get this sock up here hidden between this area, and these are shush tikis. They're called shush tikis because you have to be quiet near them or they disappear. That means that if you're running toward them or walking toward them or anything but tiptoeing or standing still will make those things disappear. And you might be wondering how we jumped on top of them if they were supposed to disappear when we got close to them. Well, we weren't technically moving because we just have cruise boost momentum active. We're not actually walking or doing anything. The game is just pushing us forward because the momentum is stacked onto a standing speed. And you'll see here I use the Bubble Bash or the Viking Helmet attack to get on top of that turret as well. That's because, like I said, when you're cruise boosting, you're getting pushed without moving. I know it doesn't make much sense, but it's a pretty unique and fun mechanic, to say the least. Here we're just using some other tech called ledge spinning to slide out that ledge and get a grounded move with extended distance. A lot of stuff just happened there, but all you gotta know is it's one of the flashiest movements of the entire run. One of the flashiest areas. So now we're gonna return to the Trench of Advanced Darkness to get that painting all the way at the end and the socks as well. So we're just gonna jump across here, grab this sock. We're just gonna go in a straight line now to get to this next area. That is actually a nail biter for a lot of people who haven't seen that strap before. You can just actually jump on a side of that rotating or teetering platform to get across to the next part. A lot of people assume it's just a mistake or just falling into the abyss after that happens, but it's a very small area we can land on to the teetering platform and skip across. So now we've completed Rock Bottom. We're going to go to Gila Lagoon now. So you're going to see in this first part of Gila Lagoon, I'm going to turn the camera to set up for a cruise boost called a reverse cruise boost. I'll explain that in a second. But first, if you see that clam on the right, you have to usually pay to activate this button, but you don't have to pay for it because the hitbox is still active before paying for it. So we can use the cruise bubble to hit it when you normally have to go over there and pay for it as Patrick and then throw a melon at the button. So here we're just going to do some platforming to get over this castle where we get the sock that we skipped earlier and jump straight into the spatula, which was activated by pressing that button earlier. Now we're going to hit another reverse cruise boost. A reverse cruise boost doesn't reverse your speed or make you any faster. It just increases it decreases the startup time for a cruise boost. So all it's doing is canceling the second cruise bubble animation by pushing off the box, because you can only use the cruise bubble if you're moving, if you're against a flat surface. So by moving off after the first cruise boost and then pushing away, we get pushed away from the box and therefore the animation has to cancel. So it's just a faster way of activating, which allows us to meet this faster cycle for popping these balloons, because if you do it without an RCB, you hit a slower cycle. And speaking of slower cycles, this run actually did get the slower cycle for kids. We call it kids because the level is called Save the Children, and it's just kids for short. But yeah, we got the slower cycle, which costs you around 3 seconds if you get the slow cycle. Very small instance of RNG or just maybe loading inconsistency. We're not quite sure what it is, but it's not a big deal at all. In fact, I get pretty unlucky with that. I hardly ever get that in runs. Very few times do I get that in runs, like 1 out of 20 times. And I play this game a lot, so that's saying something. But now I'm going to explain why this game is good and bad for its out-of-bounds detection at the same time. As I mentioned, the hand is disabled, so we can go in this area. But this game took the approach of not walling you in with large cliffs and scenery and buildings to prevent you from going out of bounds. Instead, it makes a very large open plain, the out of bounds area, and just says, hey, if you go in this area, the hand's going to grab you and put you back into the map. However, because we have the hand disabled, we can just run out into this area anyway. And this is one of the things I really appreciate about this game. It didn't really take the lazy, licensed game approach of trying to wall you in and restrict you from seeing all the great scenery in this game, because, there actually is scenery to show, unlike other licensed and half-baked SpongeBob games that don't have anything to show. It can take advantage of how detailed it is by making these plains and out-of-bounds areas flat. The only the catch is that you just can't walk over there, of course, unless you're glitching like we are. So now I'm going to get a cruise boost off of Mr. Krabs here, poor guy. And we're going to go into this out-of-bounds quicksand area and do a very precise jump onto this fountain. It's a lot more precise than it looks, trust me. So now we're just going to go and, again, this part of the run is something you might not know, again, if you haven't seen this run since GDQ, along with the ballroom clip and all that other crazy stuff we added. We don't do Drain the Lake anymore in this run. The mission where you switch to Patrick and destroy those fountains, we just completely skip it. And it's really nice, though, because it's one of the slower parts of the run that kind of takes you out of the moment. And instead we have this one full, clean platforming segment where we just go up all the jellyfish mesas and canyons, and it's really fun. So I like to see that Drain the Lake has made its way out of the run as well. Again, you might wonder why I'm taking all these risks just going up to these spatulas with a cruise boost active, because you're still moving while you have the cruise boost active, even when you're touching a spatula. It's not like Mario Odyssey, where if you get a moon, you freeze in time. Everything is happening in real time, even when you do a cutscene in this game. Cutscenes, spatulas, they all have, the game is moving in real time around it, so you got to consider that when you're doing all these tricks. So it's pretty risky to go for strats like that. But there is actually a property that locks you in if the camera is not being blocked by anything, so you can spin in a circle, and with experience you know which areas you can afford to not get rid of your cruise boost when you hit a spatula like that, start spinning in a circle. Now you might be wondering, if you started playing this game casually, like why the King Jellyfish fight was so short. And that's because we returned with the cruise bubble move, which we got for completing Robot Patrick, to defeat the first mini boss fight in the game, really the first example you get of a boss fight in SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom. But we were able to just defeat defeat the boss fight. It's funny because it's one of the few boss fights that isn't a robot. We defeat the boss with the cruise bubble just by locking it into hit stun instead of having to wait for its attack cycles and hit it with low range attacks. And there actually is a skip for that boss fight, but we don't use it because skipping that boss fight by going around the curtains, because again, there is no trigger for that boss fight to skip it like we did with Prawn Skip. There's no trigger, so if you go around the curtains to skip it, you don't get the King Jellyfish Jelly for defeating it, and therefore you can't trade the Jellyfish Jelly to Squidward for a golden spatula, as you saw earlier. Now, in the Kelp Forest, we're actually going to do a true front-to-back sequence break here, where we just go to the end of the level and go all the way from the end of the level to the start of the level to complete everything in a linear fashion. So you can just kind of jump to this end area here, which usually spits you out of the kelp slide, and by collecting the spatula and then jumping into the box, you're going to appear at the beginning of this level, which is supposed to be a really difficult time challenge with very narrow passages and gets a lot of people frustrated. But we're just going to skip the whole thing. So you'll see here as I'm sliding off this ledge, don't worry, it's not dangerous. We're going to boost off of that ledge on next to the slide, activate the time challenge by briefly going over the slide, jumping in the teleport box to appear at the beginning, at the end of the level. Even I get confused sometimes with that. To trigger the end of the challenge and enter this kelp cave, which is probably the most hated level in all of this game casually. So it's good to know that you can just get the spatula, and again we're going to warp abuse by warping to the spatula we just collected at the end of the level, which is guarded by several gates and a lot of annoying challenges, to enter the beginning of the kelp caves and just walk straight out to the previous area, which also takes a long time to do casually with all the tiki puzzles and the unforgivingness of missing one tiki. Even if you have even if you have 2 tikis on here, you need the third one to finish the puzzle. If you die, the whole thing resets. So it's nice even for casual players to know how to do this, as long as you can cruise boost, or maybe even do the old strat that didn't involve cruise boosting. Just skip the whole kelp forest and walk in the reverse fashion all the way through the whole thing. But here we're going to get another reverse cruise boost on this bridge and set up for a few second time save. It's not a big deal, but it does make the movement in this category a lot cooler in Kelp Forest, which is generally regarded as the weakest form of Kelp Forest out of all the categories in this game, the any percent version of Kelp Forest, just because you skip so much. But we're just going to boost off that ledge, go straight to the end here. It cuts out a loading screen, saves 3 seconds, so it's pretty nice. I think it's a good addition to the speed run. And we're just going to collect the spatula now and head on to SpongeBob's Dream, where we're going to experience 2 of the flashiest and craziest segments in the entire game. So hold on, here we go. Alright, Squid's Dream. This runs on a cycle as well, so we have to get this cruise boost within 2 tries to meet it. The cycle's not very strict, but it's more of the hard turns and jump precision here, along with the fact that these notes fall when you hit them, and cruise boosting is constantly pushing you forward. There's no time to waste here. You have to run through the whole thing. You can't just stop and take a breather. So we got to speed through the whole thing, and it looks like we made the cycle. We're going to jump up here, get this purple shiny object, which gives you 50 shiny object points, and we're pretty much primed and ready to go for having 3,000 shiny objects by the end of the Dream segment to trade into Mr. Krabs, and now do the final gatekeeper to the Flying Dutchman's Graveyard, which is the final segment before the final boss fight. We're going to perform a skip that cuts out the entirety of Sandy's Dream, which is the 2nd largest level in the entire game. It usually takes a long time to complete this by sliding through the whole thing. Even the skull itself, the horns actually have like the inside of them it's hollow. You can slide through the entire skull. The whole level is huge, and this skip just cuts through the whole thing. Now, what if I told you that there's only one frame where this trick works? You can only press the Y button to bash out of the slide on one frame between spinning and falling. So Yeah, it's a pretty brutal trick, and missing it once costs 20 seconds. For the 15 seconds it saves, it's really only worth it as a world record strat, in my opinion, or if you're going for an extremely optimized time. Maybe not anymore. It's not. Back in my day when this trick was found, it wasn't a world record only. It wasn't a world record only strat, but I don't know. Maybe someday you'll see more players starting to go for it and runs and feel the frustration that is missing it after 50 minutes of playing your heart out in this game. It's a pretty difficult speed run, I would say. But now we're gonna head to the Dutchman's Graveyard. That trick's behind us now. We're gonna use a trick called high bouncing on that pole to bounce on top of the platform and get the sock. High bouncing is just activated by holding down the A button when you bounce off of a pole. And this is really useful because it gives you a glitchy, extra extended height boost when you bounce. So it allows us to get on top of that platform pretty easily with the sock was being held. And it was also, it's potentially useful in the museum as well. I don't personally use it there because I think it's slightly less optimized, but I know some people use it in the museum. It's just a pretty useful tech to have around. So what I just did there was abuse the scripted trampoline property, where that trampoline that I just jumped on there is scripted to push you in a certain direction, and that direction is back to the gravestones you saw earlier where the ship was sticking out. However, because I have a cruise boost, I can overwrite the scripted motion of that trampoline to go wherever I want to go. So I used it to face the sunken ship and get on top of it to complete that level, and kind of just jump through the whole thing. So now we're going to do a very similar skip to the Cow Bungee skip and the Sand Mountain skip, where we're going to jump into this ditch, get the golden spatula because the hand is disabled, pause the game, and warp to the level where we would normally obtain the mission for the spatula. And this also saves paying for a clam as well. We don't have to buy this 2,700 clam, 2,700 shiny objects to buy that clam. You can just skip paying for it. And it's quite nice that, you know, a game like this, casually. One of the major problems people have with this game casually is that you have to pay so many shiny objects to do a lot of these things. The speedrun cuts out most of that stuff, and it's really nice to see how far this has come to develop past the point where we have to pay for all these things. And pretty much the whole grinding of this, getting into the Sea Needle, grinding shiny objects for that. You know, all the slower segments are pretty much making their way out of the run now. It's a much faster and exciting game to watch. So back on track here, we've skipped the stack of ships, and we're now using some movement to hit the 4 buttons to activate these cannons to attack the robot ship. Now, in the casual playthrough of this game, you would usually hit these 4 cannon buttons and destroy the 4 cannons on the robot ship, so the robot ship can't defend itself from the cannons you're about to fire at it. So here we're going to get the spatula. Again, we're going to abuse the fact that SpongeBob has to face you when he collects the spatula, so you can kind of just get pushed in whatever direction you want, as long as you turn the camera in the right direction before collecting the spatula. But now we're going to watch a cutscene where the cannons fire at the robot ship, and it demonstrates to you that, oh look, the robots still have their defenses, you have to destroy them. Well, funny enough, you don't need to destroy the robot ship cannons, which would normally cause you it would normally cause the initiation of the next cutscene that puts you into the Dutchman's fight by just by doing that. But because I guess there was an oversight here, just pressing that button inside the chest unlocks the final fight. You don't have to actually get sent here from the cutscene, so you can just pause the game and warp to it. So it's pretty fast compared to having to go over there and destroy the robot defenses. Sorry, I need some I need some water there. A lot of talking. So now we just use the similar skip to prawn skip, where you touch the trigger and end a fight by going above the spawn point and jumping into that invisible object that just triggers the cutscene and therefore ends the fight. Pretty simple, flashy movement with a lot of bashes. But now we're going to set up a very precise trick called Goo Cage Clip. And this skips having to pay another large sum of shiny objects to get into this case. But as you can see, I got a second try in this run, which prevented me from getting the world record off of this. But what we're going to attempt here is another elbow like you saw in Sand Mountain, where you bowl and use the cruise bubble on the same frame. So by doing this between on the exact frame, because again, this trick is super frame perfect, where there's one frame where if you if you elbow on the exact frame, which again, elbowing is already frame perfect. You have to elbow on the exact frame that the bowling ball hits you in a certain spot, and you'll get pushed through with enough speed to get into the cage. Now, the reason why you need that much speed to get in is because, think about it, you only have one frame of not having, you only have one frame without collision when you do this, so you need to go through the cage. You need to have enough speed to go through the cage on that one frame to clip through. Now, catching up to this Robo SpongeBob fight, I'm going to set this up and do a very similar strat that we did before with the Dutchman fight in Prawn, where you just get launched up by manipulating this guy to hit you into the trigger, so effectively ending his own fight. So now we're going to finish up this run with a really flashy trick that we call excuse me, it's brain surgery. Yes, we call this strat brain surgery, because we're going to clip inside the giant robot's brain and, again, do various other clips to finish this fight. Normally you'd have to hit a lot of these brain fuses, which are, again, scattered around the entire robots. There are fuses all over the robots inside of the body, but we only have to hit the 3 inside the brain to finish. So we're just going to clip through everything and bowl this final fuse and call time right there. So it is very difficult to explain all of the things that are going on in this run in real time. It's a very, very cool speed run with so much going on and so much tech to explain. I could write a book about it, honestly. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this this review of the run that I did. I hope to get a personal best with it soon. Yeah, it's been fun, so thank you for watching, and thank you for considering my submission. If you're interested in other speedruns that I have of this game and other categories as well, I'm going to recommend some videos on the screen right about now. You can check those out. If you want to learn how to speedrun this game or any of the tricks that I've done, you can check out the description for my tutorials on how to speedrun this game, which I've made very beginner friendly. I've made very beginner friendly. Nothing to worry about there. Don't be shy. Check them out. We're all here to help. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So thanks for watching, guys.